If you missed the Powder Blue podcast, check it out on our website, 973ESPN.com. Jeff Mosher, Hunter Brody, and our next guest, Frank Klose, talking Phillies. Of course, Frank, you can hear him on the Powder Blue podcast, and you can read all of his stuff at 973ESPN.com, including most recently, as he writes, the Phillies have won. They beat JT Realmuto. Wait, they're on the same team. JT Realmuto's arbitration hearing was today. He asked for a little over $12 million. The Phillies didn't want to pay him that. They offered $10 million, and the Phillies win that. So a lot of people, what happens in those hearings? Is it like invoke bad feelings? Is this going to hurt their opportunity to sign him long term? Well, that's why Frank is here. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. So let's start there, Frank. Phillies beat Realmuto in the arbitration hearing. Number one, were you surprised? Did you think Realmuto would win this hearing?
I did not think he was going to win this hearing, and there were a couple other cases earlier this offseason that went the way of the team when it was a catcher looking to be paid a little bit better. And, I think as a whole, the catcher position is valued less by baseball. Now, when you go into these rooms, you're basically arguing on precedent, or maybe you're trying to point out holes in a player's game. I don't think the Phillies had a lot of holes to point out in Realmuto's game. And I think I mentioned to you on Tuesday, they sent in their own independent voice to argue the case for them. So it wasn't from the team, but I think basically their argument was, listen, we think JT Realmuto is the best catcher in baseball, and we want to give him a record amount of money for his last year of arbitration. And that's actually what happened at the end. After all of this, he got a record amount of money for a catcher in arbitration.
Yeah, Frank. Now, obviously, you go in there and you both exchange sides. But I guess the next question is, regardless of the verdict here, the two sides can now focus on a long-term extension. Do you think that this arbitration hearing would make Realmuto not want to engage in those conversations?
I don't really think so. I mean, I think JT Realmuto, as he went into this, he kind of said as much. He was kind of fighting for all catchers when he went into this situation. He was not trying to say that this team is trying to screw me out of a couple $1 million. I think his argument was more the catcher is broken, and it's up to me as a catcher in this situation, as one of the big name catchers in baseball in this situation, to kind of take a stand for all catchers. Now that that's done, I think he's still set to be the highest paid catcher in baseball. I think he knows he's going to be the highest paid catcher in baseball. And if you look at the total compensation he's going to get between now and the end of whatever deal, $2 million is going to be a drop in the bucket. So, and really, if you're the Phillies, even after the case and you beat him, you could say to him, like, look, we're going to take care of you later. And I think they might have even had sort of discussions as to what a deal might look like if they sign a long-term deal. And certainly the Phillies have a good example, just signed this offseason when Yasmani Grandal signed a 4-year deal with the Chicago White Sox at $18.25 million a season. So I think he's going to eclipse that. The only catcher to really get more was Joe Mauer, and he didn't play catcher for a lot of that deal. So with the Minnesota Twins. So I think the Phillies will have a number. It'll be over 20, 4 or 5 years. And I think that there's certainly enough groundwork laid, thanks to Grandal, that they can up that deal, beat that deal, and make him pay the highest player in the game at the catching position. But again, if you're having a situation where you think that position is undervalued, and I think it's kind of easy to argue that that's the case he was trying to make today, I think he's going to then, at the next bargaining table, make himself the highest paid catcher in the game.
So when that happens, Frank, does that mean, though, that the money, that the big money, the 18, 19 million a year, whatever he winds up signing for, will start in 2021?
So exactly. So if you're looking at the luxury tax purposes, this year's $10 million is going to count against this year's number, and then anything that they agree to as an extension later, since they've already begun spring training, that will count towards future years. So the average annual value over the length of the deal. So the Phillies didn't want to sign the long-term deal before now. Now, what you might do if you had more wiggle room in terms of the luxury tax, you might just sign the deal now. But I think both sides kind of knew that it would help the team now, because let's face it, if they paid him $10 million this year and then it jumped up to $20 next year, that average annual value hit is going to be much higher for this year, and that might be the difference of signing a player. So I think the Phillies, and I'm sure they told Realmuto's agent this, you get to this point, once pitchers and catchers report, then it applies later. So there is some advantage to waiting. It's just unfortunate they had to go through this other process first.
So even in losing in arbitration, can there not be a viewpoint that he did win for catchers anyway because A, he did get a record number for a catcher in arbitration, and B, the contract that he's going to sign is going to lift the overall number just like Yasmani did prior to him? I mean, isn't he really winning for catchers in a sense anyway?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, anytime that the best player in the league signs a big deal, then the other players that follow, even if they're not as good. I mean, if you look around the league, there's not that many big name type catchers, and it's Grandal in the AL, and it's Realmuto in the NL, and there's still some other nice catchers out there, but they probably cannot claim the skill set that he has. So anybody in free agency going forward is going to compare their own contracts to what Realmuto is and figure out where they fit in accordingly. And I'm sure the other team the teams themselves will kind of expect that they will pay based upon JT Realmuto's contract.
What becomes, do you think, of the $2 million? I can't call it savings because they didn't want to pay it anyway, but they don't have to pay that extra $2 million in arbitration. So does that go toward maybe trying to get another relief pitcher in, or at the deadline you have $2 million more to kind of play with? How do you think that will factor in?
I don't think it does at all, to be honest with you, because right now the Phillies have a lot of vets in spring training, and a lot of them, if they make what they're going to make, if they make a major league team, they're probably going. I haven't done the exact math, and we never really know the real math because we don't know the players' benefits and all that kind of stuff that gets factored into the luxury tax. But I think the Phillies are probably going to go over that number at some point soon anyway. So I think right now they're just trying to minimize the blow unless it's super impact talent and it doesn't cost them a lot of money. Now, you might ask, well, then why not trade for Chris Bryant if he's available or something like that? I think they don't want to give up the talent it would take to get him while they have Alec Boehm in the minor leagues. So, but in terms of players out there to add, there's really nothing that impact that they could possibly add. So I think at this point they're just trying to limit the damage under the tax until later in the season when there's a clear need, and if the clear opportunity presents itself, at least what they tell us now, that's not going to be something that gets in the way of an impact player. So I don't really think there's an impact at all in terms of the Phillies having a budget that they don't go over. And I'll throw this out there too. The Phillies are spending a lot of money inviting players into camp. They get in spring training, they get a per diem that they use to pay for their housing and food and stuff like that, and they're laying out a lot because they have a lot of players. So they're trying to use their financial strength. I don't think they're counting pennies, otherwise they wouldn't have so many players in camp. And depending who makes the team, the Neil Walkers, Francisco Lirianos of the world, they're going to make some decent money. I mean, they're not superstar money, but all those $1.5 million, $2.75 million, all that stuff's going to add up in the end. So I think they're going over the number no matter what. And I think at this point they just don't want to go too crazy over the number for the sake of signing players. If an opportunity drops in their lap, fine, but I don't think they're going to get anything significant at this point.
Hey, Frank, real quick on the Realmuto stuff. Now that this is has there been talks in the past about getting a deal done, or do you think this, they got this thing done and they'll pick it up somewhere in the season, or is this something that would wait until after the season now?
Oh, I think there's a real chance that they could get this done before opening day.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I think I tend to be. I mean, a lot of this is my gut. I don't have any inside look into their negotiations, but my gut just sort of tells me that they're not that far apart anyway. They've probably talked about this a lot even before this particular case, and I think that both sides want to get something done now. Nobody's spoken to Realmuto yet since this decision came down. There's no idea about whether or not he'd be actually bidder over this $2 million, but they can write a check with a lot of zeros. It'll make them smile really fast.
So what's next on the to-do list for the Philadelphia Phillies, and how does this arbitration, answer affect that? Like Hector Neris' name coming up, and what other contracts do they have to tie up or add or whatever else they have to do?
Yeah, so really the only pending one is Hector Neris, and they're not that far apart. I think a lot of players went to arbitration this year, and I think this could be kind of an effort from the players' side of things just to sort of help raise the bar on some of these contracts because, the revenues in the game are way up, and I don't think that the luxury tax number has gotten close to the same percentage of the revenues that it did when they started setting a number like this. So this thing is kind of inhibiting teams from spending money, and I think that a lot of players have the position that if your revenues are up, our salaries should be up. And I think that there's probably a concerted effort to make this happen because in recent years there have not been this many arbitration cases, and the Phillies rarely ever go to arbitration. I think Ryan Howard was like the first one ever, and they usually get deals done. But Phillies and other teams too. A lot of players went to the table this year. The teams have won. It seems like just throwing a rough number out there, 2-1. I think the teams have beaten the players on these deals. But I think it's just the way that the Players Association is probably saying, look, we got to get these salaries up and let them.
All right, Frank Klose, of course, the Phillies. When is the actual first spring training game?
That's Saturday. They play in Lakeland against the Detroit Tigers, and it's not broadcast anywhere, unfortunately. But Sunday's game should be on television.
This Saturday. All right, yeah. We do know the first three pitchers, though. Nick Pivetta will be the first to tout the rubber.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah.
Baby. He will toe the rubber on Saturday. Get excited.
At Joker Marchand Stadium? Do I have that correct? I love that.
That's it. And next will be Aaron Nola against the Pirates in Clearwater, and then Vince Velasquez against the Orioles in Clearwater. So that's your first three. Hey, every time Pivetta, Velasquez, and Eflin pitch, you got to pay attention because they are up for grabs. But coming up next, by the way, Frank, appreciate it, man.
Thanks, guys.
Coming up next, now Bob Wankel covers the Phillies for Crossing Broad. He was on with Eitan earlier today. He said something that I almost drove off the road.
Oh, boy.
I'll play it for you guys coming up next. We'll react to Sports Pass Live, 97.3 ESPN.